much. And I now look to Brandon O'Neill to continue the case for the proposition.
Thank you. People whose opinions matter. I wonder who he's talking about. The Oxford Union really is as elitist as people say. I'm here to argue in a roundabout way that everyone's opinion matters. Not just the clever people, not just the people who are lucky enough to go to this university, not just the people who are lucky enough to work for mainstream media outlets, but everyone. Paupers, poor people, people like my parents who never darkened the door of a university, their opinions matter too. And that's what I want to touch upon today. On the 27th of November last year, The Guardian published an article claiming that Paul Manafort had secret talks with Julian Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. And they had these secret talks to work out how to release all these Democratic Party emails that Russia had got its hands on. It was a really sexy story. It really pointed to the Russia-Trump nexus that the chattering classes are obsessed with. Everyone was lapping up this story and talking about this story. There was only one problem with this story. It wasn't true. There was not one shred of evidence that Paul Manafort visited Julian Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy, and yet that article is still on The Guardian's website with no apology, no retraction. On the 30th of December 2016, our friends at the Washington Post published a report claiming that Russian hackers had hacked into the American electricity grid with the express intention of denying heat to the good people of Vermont. This is how evil those Russians are. They are so evil, they will deny people the right to heat their own homes in the middle of winter. The story spread around the world. In this country, it was published in the Daily Telegraph, and it was held up as evidence of the relentless and predatory intervention by Russia into Western affairs. There was only one problem with the Washington Post story. It wasn't true. It was fake news. The Washington Post, unlike The Guardian, at least had the good grace to acknowledge that it had promoted fake news, and it published a retraction of its claims. On the 27th of June 2017, CNN published a report claiming that one of Donald Trump's closest aides, Anthony Scaramucci, was involved in a Russian hedge fund that was being investigated by the Senate. Boom, there it was. Proof that the Russia-Trump nexus was everywhere. Everyone was up to their neck in this conspiracy by Putin to control the Western world. There was only one problem with the CNN story. It wasn't true. It was so not true that 3 CNN journalists were sacked for having come up with it. And on it goes, on and on. Those are 3 examples of many from the past 3.5 years, since 2016, of fake news in the mainstream media. Hysterical claims, bullshit bombshells, made-up stories, falsehoods, and inventions. Ladies and gentlemen, the mainstream media is not just untrustworthy, it has gone mad. It has taken leave of its senses. It now routinely publishes conspiracy theories, and it publishes scare stories, and it publishes front-page headlines on the Evening Standard saying that there will be an outbreak of super gonorrhea if we leave the EU without a deal. Who believes that? Who reads this stuff and says this is true? It's not true. I think we are witnessing something quite new. The media has always had biases. The media has always published things which are not accurate, whether wittingly or unwittingly, and I don't necessarily have a problem with that. The media makes mistakes. We all make mistakes, but we're witnessing something new. We now have a media, a liberal media in particular, that is so firmly in the grip of a conspiracy theory, which is so crazily convinced that a shadowy global cabal is controlling global affairs, that it will publish any old dross without doing the most basic fact-checking. And I think a lot of this springs from the ballot box revolts of 2016, when those people whose opinions don't matter dared to defy the establishment and vote for Trump in the US and vote for Brexit in the UK. Since then, we've seen a meltdown, not only amongst the media, but also within the political class itself. You only have to look at the deranged ramblings of Hillary Clinton, who is convinced that Russia plotted to keep her out of the White House. You only have to look at these kinds of arguments to see that there has been a collapse in basic moral standards and reason itself among the establishment and among those who pose as being part of the establishment. The media has gone into meltdown. The media now promotes a conspiracy theory, what the Observer refers to as a world controlled by a secret club of people engaged in psychological warfare against the masses. If that sounds like a conspiracy theory, that's because it is a conspiracy theory. We've just heard how the press has played an incredibly important role in history. Completely and utterly true. The struggle for press freedom in this country in particular was one of the most important struggles in the history of humankind. People fought for the right to publish pamphlets, to distribute them on street corners, to publish things without the intervention of the state, without the oversight of the king or the court or parliament. The struggle for press freedom was absolutely key to the liberties that we enjoy and which all of us take for granted. But the mainstream media today has lost its way. It's now indulging in a conspiratorial view of the world, and it now has very little faith in truth and very little faith in its own readership. And I think what we are witnessing is a conflation of opinion and news. Mainstream media seems less and less capable of distinguishing between those two things, and they've become mixed together so that the media has become hostage to its own interpretation of events. It increasingly lacks the skills and the ability to filter world events through an objective prism, and instead it filters world events through a very politicized, moralized prism so that it collapses everything together to feed its own worldview. This, in my view, is a tragedy. We need an objective, reasonable, enlightened media which analyzes stories, which tells the truth, and which trusts ordinary people, which trusts that we were not brainwashed by Russia into voting for Brexit, which trusts that we are not the slaves of Facebook algorithms, and I apologize to my esteemed colleague, which trusts that we have the same capacity for reason and understanding as they do, which trusts that our opinions matter as much as your opinions matter. And until the media understands that its role is to report what is true rather than to invent what it thinks is true, and is to give us an image of the world rather than to give us an image of how it feels the world is spinning out of control, and until the media trusts that ordinary people, even if they don't have degrees, even if they've never stood in this hall, even if they read The Sun instead of The Guardian, even if they voted for Brexit rather than Remain, that those people are just as capable of understanding world events as we are, and those people are just as reasoned as we are. Then, and only then, might we drain the elitism from the contemporary mainstream media and get back to a world in which the role of the media is to report what is happening and to trust the audience that we will be able to interpret those events for ourselves. So I would say to you, you must support this proposition that the mainstream media cannot currently be trusted, even if you hope, as I do, that at some point in the future it will be trusted once it recovers its sense of objectivity, neutrality, and reason, and gives up on the conspiracy theory mongering that it's been partaken in over the past 3 or 4 years. Thank you very much.